The transport shuttle's engines died with a low whine. Yuna Park felt the vibration stop under her feet. She took a deep breath. Next to her, Jean Lee was already peering out the small window, his breath fogging the glass. "Look at it," Jean said, his voice full of wonder. "Orion Spire." Yuna looked. The academy was a giant spear of metal and light, sticking out of a dark gray moon. Smaller ships flew around it like bugs. It was huge and scary and amazing. They were really here. They had made it. "Stop gawking," Tae Kim said from behind them. He was checking his bag again. "We need to find the welcome area. Basic logistics and diplomacy, Hall 7. That's what my paper says." Yuna nodded, looking at her own datapad. The screen showed her class schedule. Introduction to Galactic Supply Chains, Cross-Cultural Communication, Non-Predatory Species Focus. It was perfect for her. She was good at organizing things and talking. She was not a fighter. The thought of fighting made her stomach feel tight. They walked down the shuttle ramp with the other new students. Many were different kinds of aliens. Some were small and had big eyes. Some looked like walking plants. Yuna felt normal here. Humans were still new to the Galactic Coalition. They were seen as quiet, clever, good at building and talking. Not soldiers. The inside of the spire was busy and loud. Sound came from everywhere. Lights flashed directions. A floating robot with many arms zipped past them, almost hitting Jean in the head. "This way," Yuna said, pointing to a sign. "First-year processing." The room for processing was huge. Hundreds of students stood in messy lines in front of tall desks. Robots and a few tired-looking aliens worked at the desks. The air smelled like ozone and wet metal. Their line moved slowly. When it was finally their turn, a round robot on a track rolled over. "It's single blue, I scanned them." "Datapads," the robot said in a flat voice. Yuna, Jean, and Tae held out their small tablets. The robot's eye flashed a quick light over each one. It beeped. "Park, Yuna. Lee, Jean."
Kim, Tae.
Cohort confirmed. Orientation package loading. The robot made a clicking sound. "Follow the illuminated path to your assigned orientation venue. Do not stray. Welcome to Orion Spire." A line of green lights lit up on the floor, leading away from the desks. "That was easy," Jean said, smiling. He liked when things were simple. They followed the green lights. The lights took them down a wide hallway, then into a smaller, darker corridor. The nice, clean walls changed to bare metal with pipes running along the ceiling. The sounds of other students faded away. "Are you sure this is right?" Tae asked. He moved his shoulders like he did when he was nervous. He was bigger than Yuna and Jean, strong from his boxing training, but he looked unsure now. "The lights are going this way," Yuna said, but she felt doubt too. This did not look like a place for a diplomacy class. The green lights ended at a large, heavy door. The sign next to it was hard to read. Jean squinted at it. "Hangar, Bay 7. Before they could talk about it, the door slid open with a loud hiss. A wave of hot, dry air hit them in the face. It smelled like oil and something sharp, like electricity. They walked in. The room was not a room. It was a giant indoor landscape. A fake yellow sun hung high in the roof, making them sweat instantly. The ground was rough black rock. In the distance, Yuna could see tall obstacles like walls and nets and pits of mud. And there were the other students. They were not like the aliens in the processing line. These were huge. One species looked like lizards standing on two legs, with thick tails and claws. Another was furry and broad, with sharp teeth visible even from across the hangar. There were tall insect-like beings with shiny black shells and cold, clicking mandibles. Everyone was wearing dark, tough-looking uniforms with padded sections. They were stretching, growling, and hitting each other's arms in a show of strength. Yuna, Jean, and Tae stood frozen just inside the door. They were still in their soft, gray standard-issue jumpsuits. They looked like three little mice who had walked into a den of wolves. "We are in the wrong place," Jean whispered, his voice very high. "Logistics," Tae said, his face pale. "This is not logistics." Yuna's mouth was dry. She wanted to turn and run, but her feet would not move. A shadow fell over them. They looked up. A being stood in front of them. He was the biggest one yet, with gray, rocky skin and deep-set eyes that glowed a faint red. He wore a uniform with markings on the shoulders. He looked down at them, his expression blank with disbelief. "What?" he said, his voice a low rumble like stones grinding together. "Are you?" Yuna tried to speak, but only a small sound came out. The being, who they would later know as Commander Vorsk, shook his massive head. He did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked to the middle of the hangar, his boots making heavy thuds on the rock. "All recruits," he roared. The talking and growling stopped immediately. Every giant, scary head turned to him. "Your first evolution is simple. A test of basic mobility. A 20-kilometer adaptive terrain run. The course will change. If you get lost, you fail. If you stop, you fail. If you are last—" He paused, and his red eyes seemed to find Yuna again. "You will wish you had never come here." He pointed a thick finger toward a starting line painted on the ground near a cliff of rough black rock. "Start positions. Now." The Predator recruits moved fast, pushing past the humans to get to the line. One of the lizard-like ones, a female with intelligent eyes, glanced at Yuna. She did not look mean, just confused. Then she ran to the line. The three humans were left standing alone by the door. "We have to tell him," Jean said, panic in his eyes. "It's a mistake." "When? How?" Tay asked, looking at the angry-looking commander. Yuna felt a cold calm wash over her. The fear was still there, but under it was a simple thought. They could not explain now. The run was starting. If they did not run, they would fail on the first day. They could explain after. They had to at least try. "We have to run," Yuna said quietly. "What?" "Yuna will die," Jean hissed. "We run," she said again, her voice stronger. "We stay together. We finish. Then we find the right office." Tay looked at the starting line, then at his own hands. He clenched his fists. Okay, we run. Just stay on your feet." They jogged to the back of the group as the other recruits took their positions. The predator species towered over them. No one looked at them. They were not even competition. They were nothing. Commander Vorsk raised a hand. A loud horn blared. With roars and snarls, the advanced predator recruits exploded from the starting line. They were fast, incredibly fast, kicking up dust as they charged toward the first obstacle. Yuna, Jean, and Tay looked at each other. They took one last breath of the hot, electric air. And they began to run. The first 100 meters were a nightmare of panic and dust. Yuna's heart hammered against her ribs. Her soft shoes slipped on the rough black rock. All around them, the predator recruits surged ahead with powerful, loping strides. They leaped over boulders and scrambled up the first low cliff face as if it were a small step. Jean was already gasping. "I can't see the path. Follow them," Tay shouted, his voice tight. He was a strong runner, but this was different. This was not a track. This was a harsh, uneven landscape that seemed designed to break ankles. Yuna focused on the back of a furry, broad-shouldered recruit ahead. She kept her eyes on where his feet landed, trying to copy his path. It worked for a while, but soon, the main pack disappeared over a ridge, leaving the three humans far behind in a cloud of settling dust. They reached the base of the first cliff. It was not a smooth wall, but a jagged climb of about 4 meters. Handholds and footholds were cut into the stone, but they were spaced for beings with longer limbs. Tay went first. He pushed Jean up, then Yuna, and then Yuna reached down to help pull Tay up. They lost precious minutes. On the other side, the terrain changed. The fake sun beat down on a field of broken, purple crystal shards. The path wound through it like a snake. In the distance, they could see the other recruits, small dots moving fast, already halfway across. "Watch the crystals," Yuna said, her throat dry. "They look sharp." They picked their way through. The crystal crunched under their shoes. Jean cried out as a long shard scraped deep across his calf. He stumbled, blood already soaking his gray jumpsuit. "Keep going," Tay said, grabbing Jin's arm to steady him. "Just keep moving." They stumbled out of the crystal field and into a zone of thin, sickly yellow grass. The ground here was soft. Too soft. Yuna's foot sank. Mud, thick and cold, swallowed her shoe and climbed to her knee. She yelped and pulled back, but the mud held on with a wet sucking sound. "It's a bog," Tay warned, already stepping back. But it was too late. Jin, trying to go around, stepped on what looked like solid ground. It gave way instantly. He fell forward with a splash, disappearing into the mud up to his chest. "Jin!" Yuna scrambled toward him, but her own feet sank deeper. The mud was like cold glue. Tay moved quickly. He lay flat on the firmer ground at the edge and stretched out his arm. "Grab on. Don't struggle, you'll sink more." Jin's face was white with fear. He flailed, making things worse. Yuna stopped moving. She took a slow, deep breath. "Jin," she said, forcing her voice to be calm. "Listen to Tay. Reach slowly." Jin's wide eyes met hers. He stopped thrashing. With a great effort, he stretched his arm out. His fingers brushed Tay's. Tay strained, muscles in his neck standing out, and grabbed Jin's wrist. He pulled, groaning with the effort. Slowly, inch by terrible inch, the mud released Jin with a series of wet pops. Tay dragged him onto solid ground. They were covered in cold, slimy mud. It dripped from their hair and clothes. Jin was shaking, from cold or fear or both. Yuna looked at the mud pit. There was no way across. She looked to the sides. The bog seemed to stretch far. But then she saw it. Farther down, where the predator recruits had crossed, the yellow grass was flattened in a straight line. They had just run right through the shortest part, their powerful legs carrying them over the worst of it. "There," she pointed. "We go where they went." It was the hardest part. The mud there was churned up and deep. They had to wade through it, the cold mud reaching their thighs. Every step was a fight. By the time they reached the other side, they were exhausted, shivering, and weighed down by the mud on their clothes. The rest of the run was a blur of pain. Their muscles burned. Their lungs felt raw. The fake sun never moved, but it felt hotter. They passed through a field of giant, rusted metal debris they had to climb over, and a stretch of loose sand that slid away under their feet. They did not see another recruit. They were alone. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, they saw the hangar bay door in the distance. The finish. They forced their bodies into one last, shuffling run. They stumbled across the finish line, a painted mark on the rock, and collapsed. Yuna fell to her hands and knees, her vision swimming. She felt her stomach heave, and she vomited a little water onto the black stone. Next to her, Jin was just lying on his back, crying without sound. Tay was on his knees, head down, breathing in huge, ragged gulps. The predator recruits were all there. They were sweaty, but they stood tall. Some were drinking from water pouches. Others were talking in low growls. They looked at the humans on the ground. A few made soft clicking sounds that might have been laughter. Commander Vorsk walked over. His heavy boots stopped right in front of Yuna's face. She looked up, the world tilting. He seemed to tower all the way to the fake sun. He looked from her, to Jin, to Tay. His expression was hard to read. It was not anger. It was more like he was looking at a strange, sad bug. "You," he said, his voice flat. "You finished. I did not think you would take a single step." Yuna tried to speak, but only a cough came out. "You are in the wrong place, softskins," Vorsk stated. It was not a question. "This is the Advanced Predator Tactical and Survival Course. The class for them." He jerked his head toward the other recruits. "So, are you lost?" This was the moment. Yuna pushed herself up to her knees. Her whole body protested. She looked at his stony face. She opened her mouth to explain about the robot, the green lights, the mistake. But then she saw his eyes. They held no curiosity, no concern. Only a cool dismissal. He had already decided they were nothing. Explaining would be a weak sound, a complaint from a creature who did not belong. He would send them away, and they would be marked as the humans who failed on the first day. A stubborn heat flared in Yuna's chest, cutting through the cold mud and exhaustion. It was small, but it was there. She met his red gaze. She did not look away. Slowly, she shook her head. Vorsk's eyebrow ridge lifted, just a little. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to address the whole group. The last one's finish. Remember this feeling. Remember the mud. Remember the burn. This is only the beginning. He looked back at the 3 humans still crumpled on the ground. Get cleaned up. Barracks are on level 9. Be here at dawn. If you are late, you will run again. Alone. He walked away. The other recruits began to leave, talking amongst themselves. None offered help. Tay was the first to stand. He offered a dirty hand to Jean, then to Yuna. They pulled each other up. They stood, 3 muddy, shaking figures in the giant, empty hangar. They had survived the first evolution. They had not explained the error. For now, the mistake continued. And dawn was coming. The barracks were not made for humans. The doorway was too tall. The beds were long, flat slabs of hard material, stacked 3 high. The air was cool and smelled of alien musk and cleaning chemicals. The predator recruits claimed their bunks with grunts and tossed bags, ignoring the 3 humans who stood by the door like ghosts. Yuna, Jean, and Tay found 3 empty bunks in the back corner, near a humming air vent. They were the lowest bunks. Good. The climb up would have been impossible with their sore muscles. No one spoke to them. It was as if they were invisible. A large Tarkilian, the lizard-like female who had glanced at Yuna earlier, walked past. She looked at their muddy, torn jumpsuits and her nostrils flared slightly. She said nothing and moved on. They found the cleaning area. It was a room with sonic showers. The vibrations shook the mud and grime from their bodies and clothes, leaving their skin tingling and raw. It was efficient but not comforting. There were no towels. They had to air dry in the cool barracks air, which made them shiver. They had no other clothes. Their personal bags were lost, probably still sitting in some hallway meant for basic logistics. They put their clean, damp jumpsuits back on. The fabric felt stiff. They sat on the edge of Yuna's bunk. The room was loud with deep voices and strange clicks and growls. No one looked at them. "We have to go to administration tomorrow," Jean whispered. His eyes were hollow. "We have to tell them. This is insane. We'll get killed." Tay was flexing his hands, looking at his scraped knuckles. "Did you see how fast they were? In the mud? They just powered through. We can't do that." Yuna listened, but she was also watching. She saw how the recruits moved. They were all strength. They slammed their lockers shut. They pushed each other in rough play that looked like it could break bones. But she also saw things. The Voronid, the insectoid one, was carefully arranging small tools on his bunk with his precise, clawed hands. The big, furry one was already snoring loudly, his body fully recovered from the run. "We can't do what they do," Yuna said quietly. Her friends looked at her. "We have to do something else." "Like what?" "Be quietly," Jean mumbled. "We have to watch. We have to learn what they're not good at." A loud buzzer sounded. Lights in the barracks dimmed. It was time for sleep. The recruits settled into their bunks. The noise fell to a low rumble of breathing and snorts. The humans lay in the dark. Yuna stared at the bottom of the bunk above her. Her body ached everywhere. Her mind, however, would not stop. It replayed the run, the crystal field, the mud, the way the predators had just run straight through everything. Power through. That was their way. It was not a human way. The next morning, another buzzer screamed at them before the fake sun outside had even warmed. They followed the group to the hangar. Commander Vorsk was waiting. Today, he stood in front of a table covered in disassembled weapons. "Today," he barked, "you learn the KR-80 plasma rifle, your primary weapon. You will learn to care for it before you learn to fire it. A dirty weapon is a dead soldier. You have 3 minutes to study the diagram." A complex, holographic diagram of the rifle's parts appeared in the air. The recruits leaned in, growling in concentration. The parts had strange names and interlocking shapes. 3 minutes later, Vorsk waved his hand. The diagram vanished. Now, you have 1 minute to field strip this weapon to its core components. Begin. Chaos erupted. The predators grabbed the rifle parts with their big hands. They were strong, but clumsy with the small pins and delicate energy couplers. Furry fingers fumbled. Claws scratched at sensitive components. Grunts of frustration filled the air. The Tarkilian female, Jihyun, snapped a small pin in half with a frustrated hiss. Yuna looked at the parts in front of her. It was a puzzle, a mechanical puzzle. She had built model ships as a child, tiny things with even tinier parts. Her hands were small. She took a slow breath, blocking out the noise. She started. Her fingers, sore but precise, found the first release catch. A housing slid off. She found the pin, not pulling it, but turning it just so, and it came free. She laid each piece in a neat row on the table. She did not force anything. She felt for the way it wanted to come apart. Click, slide, twist. She placed the final core component on the table. She looked up. She was the first one finished. Vorsk was watching her. He walked over, his boots heavy on the floor. He looked down at her perfectly laid out parts. He looked at the rifle of the big recruit next to her, which was in a messy heap with 2 parts still wrongly connected. He said nothing for a long moment. The hangar had gone quiet. All the predators were staring. Jihyun's slitted eyes were fixed on Yuna's hands. Time, Vorsk said, his voice cutting the silence. He pointed at the Voron ID Kaito. He had finished a close second, his method neat and efficient. Acceptable. He pointed a thick finger at Yuna. Fast. He did not praise her. It was just a fact. But the word hung in the air. Fast. The next drill was grappling. Basic holds and escapes. They were paired up. Unsurprisingly, no one wanted the humans. Finally, Vorsk paired the 3 humans together, which was almost useless. Then he pointed at Tae. You, with Goran. He pointed to the huge, furry recruit. Goran grinned, showing all his teeth. He lumbered over to the mat. Tae stepped on, his posture shifting into his boxer stance without thinking. Hands up, feet moving. Goran charged. It was a straightforward, powerful grab. Tae didn't try to meet strength with strength. He sidestepped, his footwork smooth. Goran's big arms closed on empty air. Goran growled, turned, and charged again. Again, Tae shifted, making the bigger being move where he wanted him to. Goran's frustration grew. On the 3rd lunge, he overreached. Tae ducked under the swinging arm, got behind him, and wrapped an arm around Goran's waist. It was not a strong hold. Tae could never overpower him, but for a second he had the position. By the rules of the drill, it was a point. Enough! Vorsk yelled. Goran shook Tae off like a fly, snarling. But the snarl was mixed with confusion. He hadn't been overpowered. He'd been outmaneuvered. Vorsk looked at Tae, then at Yuna. His stony face was unreadable. Dismissed. 1 hour. As the group moved toward the mess hall, the predators didn't look at the humans with kindness. But the looks had changed. They were no longer looks of pure dismissal. Now there was a flicker of something else. Annoyance. Curiosity. A hint of wariness. They were still small. They were still soft. But they were no longer invisible. Yuna's precise fingers and Tae's clever feet had done something. They had planted a tiny, stubborn seed of doubt. The next week was a cycle of pain and small observations. They ran. They climbed. They lifted heavy things. They were always last, always slowest, always the most exhausted. But they did not quit. Yuna watched everything. She saw how after a hard sprint, the big predators needed time to breathe deeply, their sides heaving. She saw how they ate huge, quick meals, swallowing their protein packs almost whole. They focused on the big tasks, the loud challenges. They ignored the quiet things. The humans had no choice but to focus on the quiet things. Their bunks were neat. Their few items were arranged. They studied the equipment manuals at night, whispering to each other while the others slept. They learned to stretch their sore muscles in the dark, small movements to keep from stiffening up. The other recruits mostly ignored them, but the ignoring was different now. It was not like they were air. It was like they were a strange piece of furniture, not useful, but you notice if it's in your way. Commander Vorsk gave them the briefing for the next test. His voice was serious. The simulated hunter's gauntlet. 72 hours in the swamp simulation. Your goal is to reach 3 different navigation points in order while surviving. The environment will be hostile. The swamp will try to slow you down. There will be automated ambush drones. Your rations are limited. You move as a squad. He looked over the group. This is not a test of speed. It is a test of endurance, of mind, of will. The predators listened, their eyes sharp. They saw a challenge of strength. A long hunt. Yuna heard something else. 72 hours. Endurance. Mind. They were given small packs with 3 days of nutrient bars, a water filter, a basic map, and a locator beacon. The beacon was for emergencies. Using it meant quitting. The swamp simulation was under a huge dome. The air was thick and warm and smelled of rotten plants. Strange, twisted trees rose from murky water. The light was a permanent, gloomy green. As soon as the start horn sounded, the predator squads took off. They splashed through the water, using raw power to push through hanging vines and thick mud. Their strategy was clear. Move fast. Hit the first point hard. Yuna's squad was just her, Jean, and Tay. They stood at the edge of the water, watching the others disappear into the green gloom. Okay, Yuna said, her voice calm. We don't run. We walk. Walk, Jean said. They'll finish in half the time. Will they? Tay asked, looking into the swamp. 3 days is a long time to sprint. They started walking, not at the predator's crashing path, but at a steady, even pace. Yuna led, picking a path that looked firmer, avoiding the deepest water. They saved energy with every step. The first few hours were quiet except for the sounds of distant splashing and the buzz of insects. Then they heard the first angry roar. An ambush drone, a small floating sphere, had surprised one of the predator squads. There was the sound of an energy weapon firing, then a yelp of pain. The squad had won, but they had used energy and made noise. The humans found their first navigation point, a small beacon on a dry patch of land. They scanned it quietly and moved on. At the end of the first day, they were far behind. They found a relatively dry spot under the roots of a large tree. They ate 1/3 of a nutrient bar each. They used the water filter to drink from the swamp, slowly and carefully. They took turns sleeping for a few hours. The second day, the swamp changed. A cold mist rolled in, making everything damp and chilling them to the bone. They heard less activity from the other squads. The fast start was costing them. The constant energy spent fighting through the thick brush, the surprise attacks from drones. It was wearing them down. Yuna's group kept their pace. Steady, unchanging. Their clothes were wet and cold, but they moved. They found the second navigation point. On the morning of the third day, they saw the change. They were moving through a thicker part of the swamp when they heard splashing ahead. It was the Tarkilian female, Jihyun, and her squad. They were moving much slower now. Their movements were sluggish. One of them was favoring a leg. They were arguing in low hisses about the direction. Jihyun looked up and saw the humans. Her eyes narrowed. The humans were dirty, their faces tired, but they were moving with a quiet, steady rhythm. They were not arguing. They were not limping. They were just going. The two groups passed each other without a word. The look in Jihyun's eyes was not anger this time. It was deep, tired calculation. The final 6 hours were the hardest. The humans' energy was almost gone. Their bodies begged them to stop, but they had conserved so much. They had not fought every drone. They had hidden from some. They had not charged through every obstacle. They had gone around. They approached the location of the final navigation point. It was on a small island in the middle of a wide, dark pond. 2 other squads were already there. One was Kaido's VOR-NID squad. They were sitting quietly, their energy conserved. The other was a squad of the big, furry Crothax. They looked miserable, wet, and snappish. The Crothax saw the humans. Their leader, a particularly massive one, snarled. The soft skins? They are still here. The final puzzle was not physical. It was a locked console on the beacon. It required solving a rotating symbol puzzle to unlock the finished signal. The Crothax pushed forward first. They fumbled with the console, their thick fingers pressing multiple symbols at once. They growled in frustration. Hitting the machine. Kaito's squad went next. They were methodical but slow. The puzzle was complex. Yuna's squad waited. They drank the last of their water. Finally, it was their turn. Yuna stepped up to the console. Her hands were muddy, but steady. Her mind, while tired, was clear. She had not spent the last 3 days in bursts of rage or panic. She looked at the symbols. They were like the parts of the rifle. Puzzle. She rotated one, then another. She saw a pattern. It was about sequence, not force. Click, click, click. A green light flashed on the console. A loud tone echoed across the swamp. First squad finished. The Crothax stared, their jaws slack. Kaito's head tilted, his compound eyes studying Yuna. Jihyun's squad stumbled out of the trees just in time to hear the tone and see the humans standing by the lit console. Commander Vorsk's voice came over a speaker, sounding almost amused. Evolution complete. Return to the hangar. The walk back was silent. The humans walked together, their steady pace now the pace of the first-place finishers. They did not look at the predators. They did not smile. But inside, Yuna felt it. A small, warm glow of understanding. They had not won by being stronger. They had won by lasting longer. By thinking clearer. By being human. It was not a loud victory. It was a quiet one. But in the gloomy green swamp, it was all that mattered. The swamp changed everything. The silence that followed the humans back to the barracks was no longer dismissive. It was heavy. It was full of looks. Some were looks of annoyance. Some were looks of new, careful thought. The next morning, Commander Vorsk called for squad assignments for the new module. Void ship boarding actions.
Zero gravity combat simulation.
You will be assigned to new, mixed squads. He read the names from a datapad. When he got to the 4th squad, he paused. Squad 4, Park Yuna, Lee Jin,
Kim, Tai, Yihyun.
Kaito. A low murmur went through the group, pairing the top predator recruits from 2 different species with the 3 humans. Jihyun, the Tarkilian, stiffened. Her tail gave one sharp flick. Kaito, the Voron ID, simply turned his head, his compound eyes reflecting the light. Impossible to read. Vorsk ignored the reaction. Your first simulation is in 1 hour. Prepare. The squad gathered in a small briefing room. A hologram of a cargo ship floated in the middle of the table. Jihyun spoke first, her voice a low hiss. The strategy is simple. We breach the airlock here. A claw-tipped finger stabbed at the hologram. We clear the rooms one by one. Maximum force. We overwhelm them. Kaito made a soft clicking sound. Standard Predator doctrine. It has a 73% success rate against automated defenses. Yuna was studying the ship's layout. It was a mess of corridors, air vents, and control rooms. What's in the 37% that fails? She asked quietly. Kaito's head swiveled toward her. Ambush in confined spaces. Environmental countermeasures. Jean was looking at the power grid schematic. Look, he said, pointing. The ship's life support and internal comms are on a separate loop here. If we could get into that system, we do not hack. We hunt. Jihyun stated firmly. But what if we don't have to fight them all? Tae said. He was looking at the air vent paths. What if we can get to the bridge another way? Lock them out of their own systems. Jihyun stared at them as if they were speaking nonsense. That is not direct. It is trickery. It is tactics. Kaito clicked, his voice flat. Efficiency. Please continue, Human Park. Yuna felt a spark. She leaned forward. Okay, the direct way is here. They will expect that. So we give them a show there. She pointed at the main airlock.
Yihyun, Kaito.
You make a loud, strong breach. Draw all the drone defenders. And what will you 3 do? Jihyun asked, her tone skeptical. We go in quiet. Here. Yuna traced a path through a narrow maintenance shaft that led to the engineering room. We get to environmental controls. We vent the atmosphere from the rooms where the drones are concentrated. No air, no movement. Then we access the bridge from the lower deck. There was a long silence. Jihyun looked from the hologram to Yuna. The plan was not about strength. It was about misdirection. It was about using the ship itself. It is a different approach, Kaito said finally. We will be seen as weak, Jihyun argued. We will be seen as victorious, Yuna replied, meeting her slitted gaze. Which matters more? The simulation began. In the zero-gravity chamber, Jihyun and Kaito moved to the main airlock. As planned, they breached it with a loud, explosive charge. The sound echoed through the simulated ship. Immediately, the red dots of drone defenders on their sensors swarmed toward the noise. Meanwhile, Yuna, Jean, and Tae pulled themselves, silent and small, through the tight maintenance shaft. They emerged in engineering. Jean found the environmental control panel. His fingers flew over the alien symbols. I think this one. He pressed a sequence. A warning horn blared through the ship simulator. On their sensors, they saw the red dots in the main corridor suddenly stop moving, floating lifelessly in the vacuum they had created. They made their way to the bridge. It was guarded by 2 final drones. Tae, using his footwork to push off walls in the zero-G, distracted them. Yuna slipped past and reached the main command console. She pressed the victory rune. Lights flooded the simulation chamber. A flat, automated voice announced, "Simulation complete. Squad 4, victorious. Casualties, 0. They floated in the center of the room. Jihyun and Kaito joined them, having dispatched the last of the confused drones. Jihyun was breathing hard, but her eyes were bright. She looked at Yuna, then at the victorious sign still glowing. Efficient, Kaito stated. Jihyun gave a slow nod. It was acceptable. After that, the squad dynamics shifted. Jihyun began asking Yuna for her thoughts on terrain during exercises. Kaito would share sensor data with Jean, discussing electronic patterns. They were not friends, but they were a unit that was starting to win, consistently. One afternoon, after another successful simulation, Commander Vorsk motioned for Yuna to stay behind. The others left. He stood in the empty hangar, looking down at her. His red eyes glowed in the dim light. Your file, he said, his voice a low rumble. It is blank. No pre-enlistment combat scores. No species specialization listed. Just human. Yuna's heart jumped. This was it. The moment of explanation. He took a step closer. I have seen many things. I have seen fast hunters. I have seen strong warriors. You are not those things. So, what is your specialization? What are you? Yuna took a breath. This was her chance to tell him about the robot, the green lights, the mistake. To ask for her real class. But she thought of the swamp. She thought of the zero-G simulation. She thought of the quiet respect in Jihyun's eyes, the analytical tilt of Kaito's head. She was learning. They all were. She looked up at the massive Krothax commander. She told the truth, but not the one about the mistake. My specialization? She said, her voice clear in the huge space. I am a logistics and diplomacy student, sir. Vorsk went completely still. For a second, Yuna thought he might explode. Then, a rough, grating sound came from his throat. It took her a moment to realize it was laughter. The error stands, little human, he said, the strange laugh fading. Let us see how far a logistics officer can go. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the hangar. She had told him, and he had not sent her away. The test, it seemed, was just beginning. Respect was a fragile thing. Yuna learned this quickly. For every recruit like Jihyun and Kaito who saw value in efficiency, there were others who only saw a challenge to their pride. The Krothax, the big, furry predators, were the worst. Their leader was a massive recruit named Borv. He had been the one to sneer at them in the swamp. His anger had only grown as the humans kept surviving, and then, as they started succeeding. To Borv, every victory by Yuna's squad was a personal insult. The tension simmered for days. It showed in the mess hall when Borv's group would accidentally bump their table, spilling their water. It showed in the training yards when they would take equipment the humans were about to use. It was a low, constant pressure. The breaking point came during a live-fire exercise. It was set in the asteroid simulation chamber. The chamber was a vast, dark sphere. Inside, hundreds of fake asteroids, each the size of a small ground car, floated in microgravity. The goal was simple. 2 squads, starting on opposite sides, had to capture the flag in the center. They could use the asteroids for cover. The weapons were set to stun, but the hits felt like a sharp, painful electric shock. Squad 4 Yuna, Jean, Tae, Jihyun, and Kaito was against Borv's squad of 5 Krothax. "Stay mobile," Yuna said as they pushed off from their starting platform. "Use the small asteroids. Don't let them corner you." The Krothax strategy was the opposite. They moved as a tight, loud group, using their size to push smaller asteroids out of their way, making a direct line for the center. For the first few minutes, it was a chaotic game of tag. Stun beams lit up the dark like blue fireflies. Tae and Jihyun worked together, drawing fire while Kaito picked off targets from a hidden perch. Jean was managing their positional data, calling out movements. Yuna was moving toward the central flag, using a cluster of small rocks as cover. She was almost there when everything went wrong. A heavy impact shook her asteroid. It wasn't a stun beam. Borv had used his squad's combined fire to blast a large asteroid into hers. The collision sent her tumbling, spinning away from the flag and her cover. At the same time, Jin's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Yuna, they're not playing the objective. 3 of them broke off and are flanking our start point." A cold dread washed over her. Their start point was also their extraction shuttle, a small, mock vehicle docked to the chamber wall. It was supposed to be a safe zone. She heard Tae's curse over the comms, then a yelp of pain as a stun beam hit him. Jihyun's voice was a furious hiss. They were being pulled apart. Yuna managed to grab a passing rock, stopping her spin. She looked back. Borv himself, along with 2 others, were not heading for the flag. They were at the human shuttle. One of them had a plasma cutter, a tool for emergency repairs. With a shower of sparks, he cut into the shuttle's thruster housing. "Borv is sabotaging our extraction," she shouted into her comms. A harsh laugh answered her. It was on an open channel. Borv's voice. "A failure of basic vehicle maintenance, softskins. A shame. You might be stuck out here." The exercise horn blared. "Simulation pause. Safety override." The lights in the chamber came up. Commander Vorsk's voice was like stone. "All units return to start points. Now." The 2 squads floated back. Borv's team looked smug. Yuna's shuttle was clearly damaged, one of its thrusters hanging loose. Tae was rubbing a burn on his arm where a stun beam had hit him hard. Vorsk looked at the damage. He looked at Borv. "Explain." "Training accident, Commander," Borv said, his voice all false innocence. "We were attempting a tactical disable. It is a valid strategy." Vorsk's red eyes moved to Yuna. "Your shuttle is compromised. Your simulation is over. Use your beacon for extraction." Using the beacon meant quitting the exercise. It meant a failure. Yuna looked at her squad. Jin's face was pale with anger. Tae was clenching his fists. Jihyun's tail was lashing. Kaito was perfectly still. Then Yuna looked at the damaged thruster. She looked at the loose parts. She looked at Jean. "Sir," she said, her voice not sounding like her own. It was calm. "Request permission to attempt field repairs. To complete the exercise." Vorsk stared. Borv snorted. "With what?" "Your soft hands." "With what we have," Yuna said. She turned to Jean. "The secondary coolant lines from the damaged thruster. Can we reroute them?" Jin's eyes widened. He zoomed in on the shuttle schematic on his datapad. His fingers flew. "Yes. Yes. If we bypass the broken regulator, we can use the lines for directional pressure. It won't be fast, but it will give us thrust." "Tae Jihyun," Yuna said. Get the plating off. We need access. What is the plan? Kaito asked. Yuna pointed away from the central flag, toward the far edge of the chamber where a cluster of the largest asteroids hung. We can't win a straight fight, so we don't. We use what they gave us. Working fast, they tore open the shuttle's side panel. Jean and Kaito worked on the wiring, a mess of tubes and cables. Tae and Jihyun used their strength to bend the broken thruster housing into a rough shape. Borv and his squad watched, their smugness fading into confusion. After 20 minutes, Jean gave a thumbs up. It'll hold, maybe, for one burst. Good enough, Yuna said. Everyone in. They piled into the small shuttle. Yuna took the pilot's seat. She fired the one good thruster. The shuttle lurched, not toward the center, but on a long, slow arc around the edge of the chamber, toward the largest asteroid. They're running. One of Borv's squad laughed over the open channel. But Yuna wasn't running. She was calculating. The big asteroid had mass, gravity even a tiny bit. She piloted the shaking shuttle close, skimming its surface. Now Jean. Jean triggered the patched-together thruster. It wasn't a controlled burst. It was a sudden, jerky push. It was enough. It altered their course, slingshotting them around the big asteroid, using its gravity to whip them in a new direction. They shot out from behind the rock like a stone from a sling. They were not heading for the flag. They were heading straight for Borv's own, untouched extraction shuttle, which was still docked at their start point at Borv's squad, who had been gloating in the center, saw them too late. They tried to move, to block, but they were too slow, too confused. Yuna didn't fire a shot. She brought their battered, sparking shuttle right up to Borv's pristine one. She extended their shuttle's magnetic docking clamp. It locked onto Borv's ship with a solid clunk on the control board. A light lit up. Objective captured. Enemy extraction point secured. The chamber was silent. The rules were clear. Capture the flag or capture the enemy's base. The main lights came on. Vorsk floated into the center of the chamber. He looked at Borv's shocked face. He looked at the two docked shuttles. One damaged, one seized. Sabotage is a tactic, Vorsk said, his voice echoing. But it is a two-edged blade. You forgot to guard your own home. He turned to Yuna's squad. Field repair and tactical adaptation confirmed. Squad 4 is victorious. He then turned his full attention to Borv. You and your team, report to disciplinary barracks. Your exercise is over. Permanently. The fallout was swift. Borv and his squad were expelled from the course by the next morning. The news spread through the ranks like an electric current that no one bumped their table in the mess hall after that. No one took their equipment. The looks they got now were different. There was no more annoyance, no curiosity. There was only a new, cold, and very real wariness. Yuna had not just beaten them. She had used their own attack to win. She was no longer just an oddity. She was a threat. The air on the training planetoid was thin and cold. The sky was a dome of artificial stars. Underfoot, the ground was a mix of gray dust and hard rock. This was the final trial, a free-for-all war game, for squads each starting at a corner of the massive map. One flag to capture in the central zone. The last squad standing won. Commander Vorsk's final words echoed in their helmets. There are no rules, only victory or defeat. Yuna's squad stood at their start point. They were a strange group. Jihyun, tall and powerful. Kaito, silent and analytical. Jean, nervous but brilliant with tech. Tae, steady and strong. And Yuna. They all looked at her. She had become the unspoken leader. Not because she was the strongest, but because her plans worked. We have a problem, Jean said, pointing at his scanner. The other 3 squads. Their signals are moving. Not toward the center. They're converging on us. It was true. The other squads, made up of the remaining Tarkilians, Krothax, and Vornids, had formed a silent agreement. The human-led squad was the outlier, the insult. They would be crushed first as a lesson. Then they would fight amongst themselves. So, Jihyun said, her claws extending slightly, we stand and fight. We will make them remember us. We will lose, Kaito stated flatly. The probability of survival against 3 full squads is 2.1%. Tay cracked his knuckles. 2% is better than 0. Yuna was quiet. She looked at the map. She looked at the converging signals. A direct fight was what they wanted. It was what they were built for. She thought of the first day, the long run. She thought of patience. She thought of being the bait. We don't stand, Yuna said. Her voice was calm. We run. Run.
Yihian hissed.
From a fight. We run, Yuna repeated, looking at her. But we run like humans. We don't just flee. We lead them where we want them. Her plan was simple and dangerous. They would split up. Tay and Jihyun, the fastest and strongest, would be the bait. They would move in wide, noisy circles, showing themselves, drawing the enemy squads into chasing them. They would not engage. They would just stay out of reach, tiring the pursuers. Jin and Kaito would be the ghosts. Using Jin's skill with signals and Kaito's stealth, they would create false sensor readings, making it seem like the whole squad was moving in one direction when it was actually somewhere else. They would confuse, scatter, and frustrate. And Yuna? She would be the shadow. She would move alone, slowly and quietly, toward the center. She would not go for the flag. Not yet. She would find the best place and she would wait. For hours, the game became a chase. On the scanners, it looked like chaos. The other squads barked and growled in frustration as their prey slipped away again and again. They crashed into each other in narrow canyons, each thinking they had found the humans. Fights broke out between them. They were expending all their energy, all their focus, on a target they couldn't catch. Yuna moved like a whisper. She used small ravines and dust clouds for cover. She remembered the lessons of the swamp. Patience. Every step was careful. She reached the central zone, a rocky plateau with the flag standing in the middle. She did not go to it. She climbed a tall rock formation nearby and lay flat, completely still. She watched. Finally, as the artificial sun began to dim, it happened. The other squads, tired and angry with each other, arrived at the center. They had given up the chase. They would settle it the old way, among predators. A 3-way fight erupted below her. It was brutal and loud. Claws against chitin. Snarls and flashes of stun fire. Yuna waited. She watched the patterns of the fight. One by one, recruits were killed by stun beams, their suits locking up. After 20 minutes, only one was left standing. It was a Crothax bigger than Borv had been. He was wounded, limping, but he was the last one. He looked around at the fallen bodies, then at the flag. A low, triumphant growl came from his throat that he walked toward the flag. This was it. He had won. Yuna moved. She did not jump down. She did not attack. She simply stood up on her high rock, a small, dark figure against the dimming sky. The Crothax saw her. He stopped. He tilted his head, confused. Then he snarled. You hid. You have no honor. Yuna climbed down slowly. She walked toward him, stopping a good distance away. She did not raise her weapon. Honor? She said, her voice carried by her helmet speaker. This is a war game. The goal is to win. Win by hiding? By tricks? He spat. A true predator wins with strength. With power. He began to limp toward her, his intent clear. He would finish this the proper way. Yuna took a step back, not in fear but leading him. A predator only hunts, she said. A soldier adapts. A soldier thinks. He was closer now, almost upon her. He raised a massive, clawed hand. Yuna stopped, stepping back. She looked at the ground near his feet. She had chosen this spot carefully hours ago. She had seen the faint crack in the rock, the slight shimmer of unstable ground. And a soldier, she said, uses the terrain. She lifted her rifle and fired a single stun beam. Not at him, at the ground just in front of his good foot. The energy blast struck the weak, hollow rock. It shattered with a roar of surprise. The Crothax recruit dropped through the ground into a shallow pit below. his suit registering a fall injury. He was trapped, stunned. The fight was not over. He could still climb out. But Yuna was already moving. While he struggled in the hole, she walked, calmly and without hurry, to the flag in the center of the plateau. She placed her hand on it. A brilliant white light erupted from the flagpole. A horn sounded across the entire planetoid, loud and clear. Victory. Squad 4. Silence fell, broken only by the wind. All around, the fallen recruits from the other squads began to sit up, their suits releasing them. They watched as the small human female stood by the captured flag. The Crothax finally pulled himself from the pit. He looked at the flag, at Yuna, at the light. His shoulders slumped. Not in anger anymore, but in a kind of stunned acceptance. Yuna looked out at them all, the proud Tarkilians, the fierce Crothax, the clever Vornids. They were all looking back. There was no friendship in their eyes, but the dismissal, the mockery, the anger, it was gone, replaced by something harder and more real. They did not see a predator. They saw something new. They saw a soldier who had beaten them not with fangs or claws, but with patience, with thought, and with the will to use everything, even her own weakness, as a weapon. She had joined the wrong class. And in doing so, she had shown them all what a human could be.